3 minutes ago, something happened inside the Senate hearing room that nobody in Washington was ready for. It wasn't loud, it wasn't chaotic, it wasn't theatrical, it was quiet, methodical, and absolutely devastating. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse had spent 11 months preparing for this moment. 11 months of subpoenas filed and fought in court. 3 separate legal challenges to obtain documents the FBI claimed were too sensitive for congressional oversight. 11 months of a deliberate, systematic effort to trace which Epstein-related documents had changed classification status after Kash Patel became FBI director and why those changes happened when they did. And in those 3 minutes he didn't accuse Patel of crimes. He didn't speculate about motives. He didn't engage in partisan theater. He simply placed documents on the table one by one, each one bearing official FBI stamps, court seals, or congressional authentication, and asked questions that Patel couldn't answer without either admitting to what had happened or committing perjury. By the time it was over, a timeline had been established that would become part of congressional history. A timeline showing that within 17 days of becoming FBI director, Kash Patel had personally authorized the reclassification of a document containing sworn testimony naming Donald Trump at Jeffrey Epstein's residence. And that wasn't the only document. There were 38 Epstein-related files in total, all upgraded to top-secret special access required within Patel's first 6 weeks as director. What happened in that hearing room wasn't designed to create a viral moment. It was something more important and more permanent. It was documentation of how classification authority gets weaponized to protect powerful people from accountability. And once that's on the congressional record, preserved in official testimony under oath, it doesn't disappear. Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution, morning session. The agenda: oversight review of FBI document classification protocols. Kash Patel arrived at 9:47 a.m. with 2 attorneys, confident posture. He adjusted the microphone, nodded to the chairman, settled in like this would be routine. For 45 minutes it was. Questions about classification timelines, retention schedules. Patel handled everything smoothly. Then Sheldon Whitehouse took the microphone. The temperature shifted. Whitehouse didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He simply reached into his folder and removed a single document, placing it face down on the table. That small gesture was enough. Every person in that chamber understood what was about to happen mattered. Director Patel, Whitehouse said calmly, "I want to talk about one specific document. Are you familiar with FBI internal correspondence designated reference number EC 209 PB47? Patel didn't flinch. "I am familiar with a large volume of internal correspondence, Senator. You'll need to be more specific." Whitehouse nodded slightly. "I am about to be." He turned the document over. "Director Patel, this document is an FBI internal communication from the Palm Beach field office to headquarters dated November 14, 2019. Subject line: follow-up classification review, Epstein matter, individuals of interest." The room went still. It was reclassified to top-secret special access required on February 3 of this year, 17 days after you were confirmed as FBI director. 17 days, not years later, not after some new investigation, 17 days into his tenure. Whitehouse let that fact sit before asking the question. "In your first 17 days running the FBI, why did you make it a priority to reclassify a document naming individuals connected to Jeffrey Epstein?" Patel paused. It wasn't dramatic, but it was noticeable. "Senator, reclassification decisions are made based on ongoing law enforcement sensitivities and national security considerations that I am not able to discuss in open session." Whitehouse nodded slowly, like he expected that answer. He reached into his folder again. The second document he placed on the table was not classified. It was not restricted behind security protocols. It was not buried in FBI vaults. It was already in the public record, accessible to anyone who knew where to look. "This," Whitehouse said, holding it up so cameras could capture the header, "is a sworn deposition entered into federal court record in the Southern District of Florida in 2020. Not rumor, not anonymous sourcing. not speculation, a sworn deposition given under penalty of perjury. The document came from a former Epstein household employee, a woman who worked at the Palm Beach residence for 3 years during the period when Epstein's trafficking operation was at its height. Whitehouse flipped to a marked page, adjusted his glasses and began reading directly from the transcript. Quote, I personally observed Mr. Epstein entertaining guests on at least 40 separate occasions between 2002 and 2005. On a minimum of 12 of those occasions the guests included young women who appeared to me to be under the age of 18. I observed these guests being introduced to Mr. Epstein's associates and business contacts. He paused there, letting that sink in. Young women under 18, introduced to associates. Then he continued reading the next line, which was what made the room go completely still. Among the associates I recognized was Donald Trump. The room didn't explode. There was no shouting, no audible gasps, no theatrical outburst. What followed was something heavier than noise, stillness, the kind of silence that happens when something that has been discussed in fragments, referenced indirectly in news articles, or debated online suddenly gets read aloud clearly, officially, in a federal hearing room on the congressional record. Whitehouse did not editorialize. He simply finished the paragraph, then looked back at Patel. Director Patel, this deposition was in FBI custody as of 2020. It was part of the same investigative record that contained document EC 209 PB47, the document you reclassified 17 days into your tenure. He leaned forward slightly. My question is this: when you authorized the reclassification of that document, were you aware that the investigative record it belonged to included sworn testimony placing Donald Trump at Epstein's residence? It was framed as awareness, not guilt, not criminality, not accusation, awareness, a yes or no question about what Patel knew at the time of his decision to upgrade the classification, and that is when time slowed down. Patel did not answer immediately. He did not interrupt. He did not redirect. His hands remained flat on the table. His expression stayed composed, but something shifted in the room. His attorneys looked toward him but did not whisper. There was no note passed. No visible guidance offered. 17 seconds passed. 17 seconds in a Senate hearing feels much longer than it sounds. In normal conversation, 17 seconds of silence is awkward. In congressional testimony under oath, it's an eternity. Every person in that chamber was counting. Reporters stopped typing. Cameras stayed locked on Patel's face. Committee members leaned forward slightly, waiting. When Patel finally spoke, his voice was noticeably lower than it had been earlier in the session. The confident tone from the first 45 minutes had disappeared. Director's office memoranda are part of an internal deliberative process, Senator. I am not in a position to discuss deliberative process communications in this setting. Not a yes, not a no, a refusal framed in procedural language. Whitehouse didn't interrupt. He simply reached into his folder again. This, he said evenly, is an FBI Director's Office action memorandum recovered through a court-ordered FOIA disclosure last week. The FBI fought this disclosure for 8 months. They claimed it was part of internal deliberative process that should be protected from public review. A federal judge disagreed and ordered its release. He held it up so cameras could capture the official FBI letterhead and classification marking, dated February 1st of this year. He let that date sit for a moment. February 1st. 2 days before document EC 209 PB47 was reclassified to top secret special access required. 2 days, Whitehouse began reading, his voice measured and clear. Quote, given the potential sensitivity of named individuals in the Epstein investigative record and the current political environment, it is recommended that all documents containing references to current or former senior government officials or their close associates be reviewed for upgraded classification. This review should be completed on an expedited basis. Priority should be given to documents containing references to the current administration's principal officers and their pre-office associations. End quote. He lowered the page slowly. No commentary, no dramatic emphasis, just chronology, just facts that anyone could verify. February 1st memorandum recommending expedited upgraded classification for documents referencing senior government officials. February 3, reclassification of EC 209 PB47 to top secret special access. 2 days between the recommendation and the action, Whitehouse looked directly at Patel. This memorandum is stamped with your office's routing number. Did this memorandum cross your desk before the February 3 reclassification decision? Another pause. Senator Director's Office memoranda reflect internal deliberative recommendations. The existence of a routing number does not necessarily indicate direct personal review. Whitehouse stayed procedural, so you are not disputing that your office initiated an expedited review of Epstein-related documents referencing senior government officials 2 days before this specific document was upgraded. Senator, classification determinations are made through structured processes involving multiple levels of review. I cannot discuss the internal flow of documents in open session. Whitehouse pulled out a printed table, multiple pages stapled together. This is a classification status change log obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request filed in March and subsequently appealed when the FBI initially denied it. It lists 38 Epstein-related documents that were reclassified upward, meaning moved to higher, more restrictive classification levels between January 20 and March 1 of this year. He held the document up so cameras could see the FBI seal and official stamps. Let that number settle for a moment. 38. Not one document, not two. 38 separate files, all moved to more restrictive classification status within your first 6 weeks as director. He set the table down and continued. Of those 38 documents, 27 contain references to individuals who have served in federal office, advised federal administrations, or held significant federal appointments. The log doesn't name those individuals. That information remains classified, but it categorizes them by the nature of their government service. Patel remained composed. Senator, classification determinations are not based on the prominence of individuals mentioned. They are based on the potential harm associated with disclosure. Help this committee understand the harm. These documents had existed at lower classification levels for years. Some had been reviewed under prior leadership. What new harm emerged in the last 6 weeks that required elevating them to top secret special access? Patel paused. Senator, evolving law enforcement sensitivities, interagency coordination, and national security equities can change over time. Did any new investigative development occur between January 20 and February 3 that materially altered the sensitivity of these documents? I cannot discuss investigative specifics in open session. Whitehouse pulled another document. This committee reviewed classification guidance issued by the FBI's Internal Review Board last year. That guidance recommended downgrading several categories of Epstein materials where national security concerns were not implicated. Were the February reclassifications consistent with that guidance? Senator, classification guidance is advisory. Final determinations rest with agency leadership. Whitehouse let that phrase sit. So final determinations rest with you? Yes, Senator. For the first time something had been answered directly, not about motive or awareness but about authority. Whitehouse gathered the papers slowly. For 11 months this committee has sought clarity about why certain Epstein-related records that had been trending toward disclosure were instead moved in the opposite direction. Today we have established that multiple documents were reclassified upward within weeks of your confirmation. We have established that your office issued a memorandum recommending expedited review of materials referencing senior officials, and we have established that final classification authority rests with you. No raised voice, no accusation, just documentation. One more question, Director. Will you provide this committee, in closed session if necessary, a detailed written justification for each of the 38 Epstein-related documents that were reclassified upward in the first month of your tenure, including the specific harm assessments that warranted their elevation? Patel adjusted slightly. Senator, we are always willing to work with the committee consistent with applicable law and classification constraints. I'm asking specifically whether you will commit to providing written harm assessments for those reclassifications. Another pause. We will review the request and respond appropriately. Not a yes, not a no, a review. Let the record reflect that the Director has not committed at this time to providing individualized harm assessments for those reclassifications. Whitehouse summarized what had been established on the record, speaking slowly and methodically so every point would be clear in the transcript. A memorandum from the director's office recommending expedited review of documents referencing senior officials dated February 1. A document within the Epstein investigative record upgraded to top secret special access 17 days into a new director's tenure executed February 3. 38 total documents moved upward in classification within the first 6 weeks of that tenure. Final classification authority resting with the director personally, confirmed by the director's own testimony, and no clear explanation of what changed to justify those decisions. For 11 months this committee has sought clarity on classification movement related to Epstein materials, Whitehouse said. Today we have established a timeline that cannot be disputed because it's based on the FBI's own documents. We have established authority, the director has confirmed final decisions rest with him. What remains to be established is justification, why these specific documents required upgraded classification at this specific time, and that is where oversight continues. There was no explosion, no dramatic outburst, no viral soundbite moment designed for cable news. But what happened in that hearing room was not minor. It was the careful systematic construction of a congressional record that cannot be erased or dismissed. Kash Patel walked into that room expecting a routine classification review. He left with a documented timeline now embedded in congressional history. February 1, memo from Patel's office recommending expedited review of documents referencing senior officials. February 3, document EC 209 PB 47 reclassified to top secret 17 days after Patel became director. That document's investigative record included sworn deposition naming Trump at Epstein's residence. 38 Epstein documents total reclassified upward in Patel's first 6 weeks. 27 of those 38 reference individuals who served in federal office. Final classification authority rests with Patel personally. No commitment to provide harm assessments justifying the reclassifications, and once something is on the congressional record, it doesn't disappear. Whether that timeline leads to Inspector General review or additional hearings remains to be seen, but it is now documented. Subscribe because the next step isn't noise. It's what happens when documentation meets accountability. Share this everywhere because an FBI director just got caught reclassifying documents to protect powerful people from Epstein connections. Thanks for watching.